Spring practice is just weeks away, and for some Notre Dame players, the clock's ticking. There are several on this roster who have been waiting for their moment, and if it doesn't happen this spring, it might never happen at Notre Dame. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak, Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and today is Wednesday, March 4th. Thanks for starting your day right here by making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you are here on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you're listening to the podcast, please follow the show on your preferred platform. While you're here, drop your questions in for the Friday mailbag in the YouTube comments, or you can send them in on social media. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. All right, with spring practice just around the corner today, we are diving into one of the most fascinating dynamics on this roster: players facing make or break moments. There are guys who have been in the program, who have flashed talent, but they just haven't quite carved out roles on Saturdays yet. And with younger players arriving and transfer portal additions pushing for playing time, the pressure is officially on for several guys on this roster. We're going to start with some intriguing situations on offense, including a quarterback who is already battling to solidify himself as the backup, and a couple of wide receivers who desperately need to make a move or else they risk getting beat out by younger guys. Then we're going to head to the trenches where offensive and defensive linemen are fighting to just stay in the rotation before we finish things out with a linebacker who I believe has the most interesting career path on the entire roster. But we begin at quarterback, and we're going to do this by position. This is not in order of like the most make or break situation. But to start things off here, I think it's Blake Hebert. Now, this might seem premature because he's only going to be a redshirt freshman this season, but Hebert was basically recruited over when Notre Dame went out and they got Teddy Gerard to reclassify from the class of 2027 to the class of 2026. I even thought that Hebert might transfer after this offseason, which again is a little bit early on, right? You don't see a ton of quarterbacks transfer after the freshman season when the plan was never for them to start earlier on in their career anyway. But it is my understanding that Hebert had some, shall we say, difficult conversations with the Notre Dame coaching staff after his freshman year about his future with the team and his NIL earnings. But Hebert decided to stick around, and he has a chance to be the backup quarterback for Notre Dame in 2026. But in order to do that, he's going to have to beat out true freshman Noah Grubbs first. Noah Grubbs is already on campus for spring practice. Teddy Gerard will not be able to join the team until the summer. So right now, it's a two-man battle for that backup job, but we know that a third is going to be joining the team in the summertime. Hebert is 6'2". He's 224 pounds, so he's got good size, and he's a pretty good athlete. He's going to be the most experienced quarterback behind Carr no matter what, even though he's really not that experienced to begin with. But compared to the other two guys, he has the most experience in college. If Hebert does not have a good spring, he risks getting jumped by true freshman Noah Grubbs, who is younger than him, and he might even be fighting with Teddy Gerard for a third string, depending on how this spring goes. And if he loses one or both of those battles, he's going to be reserved to the scout team, and he'll have little to no chance of working with the starters or the backups at any point this season, and he'll probably out of the program after 2026. Now, what if he has a good spring, right? Notre Dame would feel a hell of a lot better about the backup quarterback spot if the most experienced player goes out and wins it. Grubbs and Gerard have higher long-term ceilings, but it would be a lot to ask for them to come in and contribute right away if their number is called, if CJ Carr goes down with an injury, especially on a team that has title aspirations, and Noah Grubbs is going to be a true freshman, and Teddy Gerard is going to be another true freshman who should technically be a senior in high school. At least with Hebert, he's been in college for a year already. He's been in the system. He's been in the college weight program. So that's an advantage compared to those two guys, and I think Notre Dame would prefer that it's him. They probably weren't that optimistic at the end of last season, but now he has a chance to go out there and prove himself in the spring because Notre Dame decided not to pursue a backup quarterback in the transfer portal. It was a move that I've been critical of, but a big spring for Hebert would ease a lot of my concerns as well as concerns inside the Gook. Okay, next up, Cam Williams, wide receiver. he is probably the player that I get asked about the most outside of Charles Jagasaw now, or at least ever since he suffered that injury last July. But I swear, every single mailbag, someone is asking me, why hasn't Cam Williams gotten out in the field yet? When are we going to start seeing Cam Williams or something along those lines? And I understand it. He was once a 5-star recruit, and he was a top 50 player in the country coming out of high school, and yet he has barely made a dent in his first 2 seasons with the program. Before I got asked about Cam Williams and Charles Jagasaw, it used to be Brennan Vernon, but I think everyone has finally given up on the prospect of Brennan Vernon ever panning out in a Notre Dame uniform, but I'm not there yet with Cam Williams, but he needs to make a move fast. He was the highest rated commit at wide receiver for Notre Dame in a long time, and the Irish had been really down at the position, so getting a player of Williams' caliber, of someone who is as sought after as he was as a recruit, was a really big deal for Notre Dame. He was in the class of 2024. It was the same class as C.J. Carr, and he was ranked number 12 among wide receivers in the class, and he was the number 47 player overall on the 24/7 Sports composite. So, not surprisingly, he had a ton of hype coming in, but the Notre Dame coaching staff was pretty transparent early on that Williams was a very raw prospect, and he had a lot to learn about playing the position once he got to college. He had to understand what it takes both on and off the field to be a big-time college football player, and I think everyone understood that. That's fair, so it was not a shock to see him redshirt during his freshman season. But there were a lot of fans who expected a big jump in 2025, and that just did not come to fruition. Williams only played 67 total snaps on the year. That was 23rd on the offense and 7th among wide receivers, and pretty much all of them came during garbage time. This offseason, Notre Dame went out and they added 2 former Ohio State receivers in the transfer portal to replace Malachi Fields and Will Pauling. One is Mylan Graham, who's a former 5-star as well, who's in the same class as Cam Williams. And they also added another former 5-star, Quincy Porter, who is actually younger than Cam Williams. Not to mention the fact that Notre Dame signed 5 freshman wide receivers in the class of 2026. So if Williams does not make a move now, he is going to get buried even further on the depth chart. But what if Williams has a good spring? I think it would be one of the most important developments for Notre Dame on offense of the entire offseason. Full stop. Notre Dame is looking for a reliable boundary wide receiver to replace Malachi Fields, and right now their options are Micah Gilbert, Quincy Porter, who, by the way, is dealing with a knee injury and is likely going to miss all of spring practice, and then they've got Cam Williams. Those are 3 players with a lot of potential, but very little production at the college level to show for it. And if Williams ascends and he starts to tap into the potential that made him such a highly sought-after recruit, there is a path for him to start this season. Will he do it? I'm not sure. Right now, I'd consider it doubtful because of what we've seen from Micah Gilbert when he's healthy. I think he has the fast track to be the starter. He's going to be the guy who gets the first reps out there. I think the staff was actually a little bit higher on what Micah Gilbert could do early on in his career relative to Williams because they were both in the same recruiting class. But now they've both been in the program for 3 years. Gilbert has had his moments, but he's also been dealing with a lot of injuries throughout his career. So this is a prime opportunity for Cam Williams to make a move. But it really is make or break time for Cam Williams. Last year, I said we should probably reset our expectations for him a little bit, but I was not ready to count him out as a player. If he's ever going to make a name for himself at Notre Dame, we have to at least see flashes of it this spring, or I doubt it's ever going to happen. All right, another wide receiver I want to mention, I think he belongs in this category, is wide receiver Logan Saldate. Saldate is in a similar situation to Williams in the sense that they're the same age, although Saldate plays the slot and Williams is at boundary. Saldate has sort of flown under the radar throughout his first 2 years. He was a 3-star recruit coming out of high school, so he didn't come with all the fanfare that Cam Williams did. But Saldate has flashed several times in practice when the media has been able to watch, arguably way more than Cam Williams. And Mike Denbrock even shouted him out unprompted during a press conference. I believe it was last offseason, and Mike Denbrock is not a guy who's just going to be throwing around compliments unless they are deserved. But he was still behind Jaden Greathouse last season, and he was still behind Will Pauling last year, and the path really isn't any clearer this year either. For Logan Saldate to get on the field, he's still going to have to beat out Greathouse, take away reps from him, plus Mylan Graham could play multiple positions at wide receiver, even though he's likely going to stay at field. And then you've got Notre Dame's top wide receiver recruit in the class, 4-star Kadon Finley. he's getting work in the slot as well. So it's a really crowded room right now, and you've also got Bubba Frazier and Braden Robinson, the other two true freshmen who are going to be playing in the slot. And look, I think Saldate is a talented player, but he was ninth among wide receivers in snaps last year. If he's not able to make a move this spring, I don't think it's going to happen for him at Notre Dame because I just think there are too many young, talented players at his position that Notre Dame is also very high on. However, if Logan Saldate goes out there and he makes a big leap this spring, he could end up being what Will Pauling was for last year's offense, but on this year's team. Not necessarily in terms of leadership, right? I'm not saying Logan Saldate is going to be elected a captain because Pauling was just a special leader, but in terms of how he could be used, I think that they're very similar. Saldate and Pauling are both undersized slot wide receivers who run very crisp routes and they're very shifty. Greathouse is a different type of slot receiver, right? Greathouse is bigger. He's better at making contested catches. He's pretty good with the ball in open space, but he's not quite as quick. They weren't running a ton of out routes to him or in short yardage situations, those little flat routes where it was basically like an easy first down. So there is a world where Logan Saldate could go out there and still get plenty of reps, even if he wasn't starting, even if he was still behind Jaden Greathouse, because he could go out and he could be lethal in short yardage situations. He could be a guy who comes in to move the chains. It would not shock me at all if Logan Saldate goes out there and he shines during spring practice because he's done it before. Now he just has to do it on a more consistent basis. All right, coming up next, we're going to dive into some intriguing players in the trenches, including one offensive lineman who saw action in a huge moment last season and a tight end who suddenly has a wave of young talent breathing down his neck. That's straight ahead.
I'm Clea Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. Number 1 ranked UConn dominated St. John's 85-49 on Sunday at Madison Square Garden, extending its winning streak to 47 games. The Huskies capped a perfect 31-0 regular season, including 20-0 in the Big East. UConn is winning by nearly 38 points per game, the third largest average margin in Division I history. Since 1999 to 2000, UConn has 9 undefeated regular seasons, as many as all other programs combined, and has turned 6 of those into national championships. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Welcome back to Locked On Irish. Today, we are breaking down the players facing make-or-break situations in spring practice. I also want to remind you that you can get Locked On Irish ad-free with the Everydayer Club, plus you'll get access to the members-only Discord channel. Check it out at lockedonirish.supercast.com. All right, now we're going to go on to a tight end who I believe is facing another make-or-break situation this spring practice, and that is Jack Larson, who is going to be a redshirt sophomore this season. Larson has been around the program for 2 years now, and yet he still finds himself stuck in the middle of the depth chart in the tight end room. He's not going to start over Cooper Flanagan or even Ty Washington for that matter. And now he's got James Flanagan right behind him, who's going to be a redshirt freshman next season. And then he's also got to deal with 2 extremely talented true freshmen coming in that play his position. 5-star Ian Premer could play right away. We've talked about that many times on the show. He's built like a pterodactyl. He's 6'6", and he's been getting comps to Brock Bowers. I also expect a big jump for James Flanagan in year 2, although James Flanagan is more of a blocker compared to like Ian Premer or Preston Frizzell. Larson has made some really nice catches. You go back to his high school tape, he's always been a very talented pass catcher. He had that one beautiful catch from CJ Carr in the spring game last year. We were like, whoa, who is that again? Oh, wow, it's Jack Larson. That's right. He can make plays like that. He even caught a nice pass from Kenny Minchie during the regular season, too. So we know that he's talented, but he's undersized relative to the other tight ends, and they just didn't trust him as a blocker last season, even when Ty Washington was hurt, and they couldn't get anything going on the ground in 3rd and short and 4th and short situations. So even when they really needed some big bodies who could come in and block, they were not really willing to bring Jack Larson on the field. And then the 2 true freshmen coming in, Frizzell and Premer, are both really gifted pass catchers as well. So Larson would have to really step up his game to stand out compared to the 2 new guys, even though he has 2 more years of experience on them. Now, if he goes out there and he has a really good spring, this would be a huge boost to the tight end room because as a whole, the group has a lot of potential, but very little production and not that much experience either. Having Cooper Flanagan back is a boost for sure, but he's coming off a year where he didn't play due to a very serious injury. I know that he got a few snaps against USC, but I don't even really count those because he was a shell of himself, that he was probably on the field way too soon after he suffered that Achilles tear against Georgia in the college football playoff. And then you had Ty Washington, who was dealing with injuries throughout the season, didn't really have a great year in his first season with the program, but he is an experienced player who beat out Larson pretty easily last season. The Irish need depth at tight end, but they've had a lot of injuries in the room, and I don't think they want to be in a situation where they have to count on the true freshman to come in and produce right away. It would be great if they're able to, right? I think Notre Dame would certainly welcome it if Ian Premer stepped on the field and they're like, oh yeah, this dude needs to play right away. But it's a dangerous proposition to expect that out of a true freshman from day one. So if Jack Larson excels and he becomes more reliable, he could become a really solid backup tight end option for CJ Carr to throw to. All right, moving to the offensive line, I want to talk about offensive tackle Styles Prescott. It's crazy to think that last season, during one of the most critical offensive possessions of the entire season, it was Styles Prescott who was out there lined up at left tackle. I'm referring to Notre Dame's final drive on offense against Miami in the season opener. And we all remember how that went for Styles Prescott. Is quite poor. But it's not like, Ruben Bain and Akeem Essidor weren't giving Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner a ton of problems either. I mean, hell, Anthony Knapp couldn't even come out on the field because he was cramping so badly. And if I remember correctly, he had like an ice pack on his head and his face, and he was sucking on a popsicle to cool down. And then you had Emil Wagner, who just could barely move out there on the field. He was getting dominated by Bain and Messidor. So it's not like anyone had really high expectations for Styles Prescott in that moment. It was not a surprise that he ended up getting worked when he was out there. And then he didn't really see any more meaningful action after that for the rest of the year outside of getting 20 snaps against Purdue. And now he's got to go out there and compete with young guys like Will Black and Matty Augustine at tackle. And the staff is extremely high on both of those players, even though they're only going to be redshirt freshmen next season. And it looks like Gerby Lambert could bounce back outside to play right tackle. Even though Prescott was the backup last season, there is no guarantee that he's going to be that again this season unless he goes out there and has a big spring. Now, if he does take a big leap this season, I would not rule out the potential of him starting. Now, that might seem crazy. I know he's not one of the players that we typically talk about as a potential starter, especially a tackle, but Joe Rudolph has surprised us many times, right? Nobody was talking about Sam Pendleton starting before the 2024 season started, and yet he won the job at left guard to start the season, and he went out there and started against one of the best defensive lines in the entire country on the road to start the season against Texas A&M. Now, he ended up getting beat out as the season went on, but still, he went out there and won the job. The only two guys that you can write in the starting lineup in Penn are Gerby Lambert and Anthony Knapp, but there's uncertainty about where they're going to line up. You know that either Ashton Craig or Joe Otting are going to be lining up at center, depending on Ashton Craig's health. But outside of that, you really have two wide open spots on the offensive line because it seems like there's more of a willingness to move Anthony Knapp inside if the right situation presents itself. And we know that Gerby Lambert can play right guard because that's what he played last season, but he also can play right tackle as well. And one thing about Joe Rudolph is he is going to get his best five out there no matter what. He'll figure out the position later. And he liked Prescott enough last year to be the backup left tackle. So if he has a big spring and an even bigger summer, maybe Rudolph will like him enough to be in the top five in the offensive line. All right, switching over to the defense, let's talk about defensive end Logan Thomas. The stakes probably aren't quite as high for Logan Thomas, even though he's going into his third year with the program. But that really just has to do with the fact that Notre Dame's depth at defensive end just isn't quite as strong. Where you look at wide receiver, they have a surplus of really talented guys in that room, even though they aren't very proven. On the offensive line, there's a ton of guys who Notre Dame has who are waiting, ready to go. At defensive end, it's not quite the same situation. You know that Boubacar Traore and Bryce Young are going to be the starters, but behind that, there really aren't any proven options for that matter. Keon Keeley was a nice addition in the transfer portal. They really needed him, but I think that Keeley is going to rotate more with Bryce Young than Traore. Behind Traore, even though it's not called the Viper position anymore, although maybe Charlie Partridge will come in and change that verbiage back to what it used to be, you're really looking at either Rodney Dunham or Ebenezer Iwatade. I think Dunham is going to be the backup or maybe the second backup to Bryce Young at strong side end if we're going with like the traditional look for the Viper position where you could have Traore, Thomas, and then Iwatade. But still, Iwatade is a true freshman who hasn't even had a real practice yet. So Logan Thomas is a great opportunity to be Traore's backup. Those guys, Dunham and Iwatade, were very highly recruited, and Notre Dame is very excited about what they have there. Are they going to be ready to go out there and contribute from day one? That remains to be seen. So maybe that will give Logan Thomas some cushion here in the spring. But we have to point out that Logan Thomas weighed in at 207 pounds recently. And I know that there are some fans out there who want to dispute that. Okay, let's say that Notre Dame was a few pounds off. Let's actually go as far to say that they were 10 pounds off it, which would be a pretty egregious error, and I feel confident that did not happen. But even if he were 217 pounds, that's still very undersized for an edge. And let me tell you this right now. He's not 227. There's no way they got this 20 pounds off. And if they did, they would correct that immediately because that is such a big error on the roster to have a guy 20 pounds lighter than what he should be, especially at a position like defensive end for a player that's going to be talked about. They would fix that right away. So even if Thomas is 217 pounds, that's still like 7 pounds lighter than Blake Hebert, the redshirt freshman quarterback. So it's not just about Logan Thomas proving it on the practice field. He's got to go out there and prove it in the weight room as well. If he's not able to do that, he could risk getting passed up by the true freshman very early on this season. But if he goes out there and he works hard in the weight room, he becomes a consistent player. He's able to stay healthy, which also has been an issue for him throughout the first 2 seasons of his career. That would be a major, major boost for the defensive end position because Thomas is a very skilled pass rusher, and every defense in the world at every single level of football needs as many skilled pass rushers as they can possibly get. And if Boubacar Traore or Bryce Young get hurt at any point this season, they would be in a pretty compromising situation at defensive end, and it's unlikely that both of those guys stay at full health all season long. So Notre Dame desperately needs some of these backups at defensive end to step up. And if Thomas goes out there and he does that, that's going to be big for depth. But I think he's skilled enough that he could really wreak havoc in obvious passing situations. I mention this all the time with Logan Thomas. He was in on the 4th down play against Georgia as a true freshman. And I'm sorry if you've heard me bring that up before, and I'm probably going to keep repeating it because it's just that big of a deal. In the biggest play of a playoff game against the Georgia Bulldogs, the SEC champion, Al Golden and Al Washington had Logan Thomas on the field to rush Gunnar Stockton as a true freshman. We need Logan Thomas to show that he has developed a lot from the player that he was then and become a more consistent threat off the edge. If he does that, he's not going to start, but that would be a major addition to this Notre Dame defense. All right, next up, we're talking defensive depth, including 2 massive interior linemen fighting to stay in the rotation, and one of the most fascinating veterans anywhere on the roster that's coming right up. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. It's tax time, but for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes is a lot. Trying to book an appointment that's not the most convenient, sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers, emailing back and forth and wondering if they really get your situation. But this year, you are getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled right. Head to TurboTax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment today. Today's episode is presented by Game Time. The biggest stretch of the college basketball season is almost here. Buzzer beaters, bracket busters, and those unforgettable moments that everyone's talking about the next day. Being there live for something like that, that's bucket list stuff. The hard part is actually getting tickets, though. Long queues, prices jumping around, and surprise fees at checkout. The Game Time app gives fans the advantage with constant innovation. It's how you unlock amazing tickets and experiences in just a few taps. It's incredibly simple to use. The Game Time guarantee means 100% legitimate tickets delivered on time at the best price. And here's the best part. Fees are included in the price you pay. What you see is what you pay. Period. The seat view feature is a game changer. You can see a panoramic view from your exact seat before you buy. And the zone deals let you pick the section and save even more while Game Time selects the seats. I love being able to follow teams in the app and get alerts when new deals drop. No stress, no guesswork, just a smooth experience from start to finish. That's exactly what you want during the busiest part of the season. Take the guesswork out of buying college basketball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. All right, we're back here on Locked On Irish, breaking down the players on the roster facing make-or-break situations this spring practice, and we haven't really talked about that many players on defense just yet, but that's going to be the focus of this segment, and we're going to start with defensive tackle Armel Mukam. I didn't even think we'd be having this conversation about Armel Mukam, considering he put his name in the transfer portal after the last season ended, but he decided to come back. However, in the time since he made that decision, Notre Dame went out and they got two very talented players who play the same position as him. So I'm not sure Mukam expected that, but he still has a chance to be part of that rotation on the interior of the defensive line. Ironically, Notre Dame went after Armel Mukam hard as a recruit once they realized that Keon Keeley was probably going to decommit. And now they are both on the same defensive line together, although they ended up playing different positions. So I just thought that was kind of funny how that worked, where Keon Keeley is not really a make or break guy. He is in a great position with this Notre Dame defensive line, even if he's not going to be a starter. But Armel Mukam has to make a move. He was raw as a prospect, so you knew it was going to take some time, and the size has always been there for him, but he has lacked any sort of consistency. He's 6'3", 302 pounds, and Notre Dame could really use that type of size in the middle of that defense. Last year, Notre Dame was already pretty light at the defensive tackle position, especially after Gabriel Rubio went down in the middle of the season, and yet Mukam only played 69 snaps last year. That's 100 less than Gabriel Rubio, who only played half the year. So the path to playing time won't really be any easier for Armel Mukam in 2026 because Notre Dame brought back Jason Onye. They added Francis Brew. They added Tiona Gray. Elijah Hughes was playing a lot better at the end of last season. But it's time he puts it all together, or else he's going to get left behind and actually stay in the transfer portal next season. But if Armel Mukam is able to go out there and he's able to build off what he did at the very end of the season and the flashes that he has had in fall camp and different moments here and there, if he can become a more consistent player, Notre Dame will have much needed depth at defensive tackle. I mean, when you think about when the offseason started, the defensive tackle position was the biggest question mark on the entire team. And then they got Onye back, and then they added Brew, and then they added Gray, and then they were able to keep Armel Mukam after he had left in the transfer portal. I don't really think that Armel Mukam has a chance to start this year. I think that's going to be Jason Onye and Francis Brew, but there's a very good chance for him to be in the top 4 to 5 guys in the rotation if he goes out there and has a good spring. And those players are very important because defensive tackles rotate a lot, and the more fresh bodies that you can throw out there, the better the defense will be. Another defensive tackle facing a break or break situation is Sean Sevillano. I could basically repeat everything I just said for Armel Mukam for Sean Sevillano Jr., but Sevillano is actually even bigger than Armel Mukam, at least in terms of his weight. He's 6'2", 325 pounds. Weight has kind of been an issue for Sevillano so far in his career. He was over 340 pounds last season. That's just too big for a player like him, and he was a little bit out of shape for what they wanted. So it's important to have guys who are big dudes who can line up in the middle and clog up the running lanes and things like that. Sean Sevillano can certainly do that, but now Notre Dame has an even bigger and better version of that with Tiona Gray, who is 6'5" and 335 pounds, plus he's a more proven player. It has been reported that Sean Sevillano is one of the players who had another one of those difficult conversations with the coaching staff after last season because he was buried on the depth chart for 2 seasons and he had just not shown enough for the coaching staff to be able to count on him. But good on Sevillano for coming back, and not just coming back, he appears to be a lot more engaged this offseason. Tiona Gray referenced Sevillano as a guy who he's gravitated to since he came on the team, and Sevillano has basically been like a leader to him, called him out for showing up 5 minutes late to a team meeting, and the fact that a player like Sevillano has the authority to do that in a room, even though he hasn't contributed much of anything on the field, tells you a lot. He wasn't the only guy to do that, by the way, but I think that shows you where Sean Sevillano's head is at. He's holding other guys accountable. And I also noticed that he is front and center, hyping up his teammates in the videos that the Notre Dame social media account has been posting from team workouts in recent weeks. You saw Brew bench 475 pounds, which is obscene. You saw Elijah Hughes getting after it on the squat rack, just throwing weight around it. And in all these videos, who's right there hyping their guy up and there to spot? It's Sean Sevillano. I think that means something. Now, the next best thing for him would be to actually be the guy that they're highlighting lifting a ton of weight. So that's the next step for him. But Notre Dame needs more depth on the interior, even though they were able to go out and add guys and bring guys back. But it's not just about this year, it's for the future, because Sevillano has several more years left of eligibility. He's technically only going to be a sophomore next season, and they'd love to keep him around so long as he continues to develop, and he could be a big-time player down the road. And hopefully Notre Dame is not going to be a situation like they were in this past offseason where they were really, really, really desperate at the defensive tackle position, because there's just not that many good ones typically available in the transfer portal. And the good ones are very, very expensive, sometimes even too expensive, and you have to overpay for guys. Otherwise, I just feel like Sean Sevillano is going to get recruited over, whether it be in the high school ranks or the transfer portal. So I will say this about him, though. I'm cautiously optimistic. If he really applies himself, and so far it looks like he's been doing a better job of that, maybe he could go out there and be a guy that really maximizes their skill set, playing for a guy like Charlie Partridge, the new defensive line coach. All right, last player I want to highlight today, it's linebacker Kahanu Kia. And you might be surprised that I'm bringing him up, because he's not a player who's talked about a whole lot on this podcast or basically any other Notre Dame show. But brace yourself for this stat, okay? Kahanu Kia committed to Notre Dame just under 2 weeks after Ian Book and the Irish upset top-ranked Clemson inside Notre Dame Stadium in November of 2020. Think about how long ago that was. It literally feels like an eternity ago. But Kahanu Kia was in the class of 2021. He redshirted his freshman year in 2021, and then he served on a 2-year Mormon mission during the 2022 and the 2023 seasons. Then, once he returned for his redshirt freshman season in 2024, and by that point, a lot of guys in his recruiting class were already seniors, he actually tore his ACL before the season started, and he missed the entire year, which was a big bummer because he actually played really well in the spring game that year. I think he had like over 20 tackles or something insane. And then last season in 2025, he was a mainstay on special teams. He had 9 tackles on the year, including 3 against Syracuse. So he did produce for the team, just not on defense. And now he's heading into 2026, 5 years since his freshman season, nearly 6 years since he committed to the school. And I think he still technically has 3 years of eligibility remaining because he redshirted in 2021, 2022, and 2023 do not count towards his eligibility. And then he had a medical redshirt season in 2024. That's insane, but it's true. And I'm sure a lot of people have written him off already, but I'm not doing that just yet because Notre Dame is going to start the season with 3 really good linebackers and a sophomore on the rise. We're not sure when we're going to see KVA back on the field and fully healthy just yet. And once they bring him along, obviously he's going to be a major addition to that defense. And I know we're all very excited about Matt Framo, but he's still very inexperienced. So if Kia goes out there and he lights it up in spring practice and he makes all kinds of tackles like he did in the spring game, he's not going to crack the starting rotation, and he probably won't even be the first guy off the bench, but he could be a valuable piece to that rotation and provide much-needed depth at the position that is pretty top-heavy right now, if we're being honest. And I'm not expecting Kahanu Kia to go out there and make a huge impact this season, but considering he's already a grown man, especially compared to the rest of the team, and he has several years left of eligibility, I think he's a really intriguing player on this roster. Maybe he'll just be a special team standout, and that's all he'll ever be. That's still pretty good, but I think it would be great if he could continue to develop because, hell, Indiana won a team full of adults, and Kahanu Kia definitely fits that profile. So I'm going to be watching him very closely during spring practice. All right. That's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel or follow the podcast on your favorite platform and leave a rating and review. And don't forget to send in your mailbag questions for Friday. You can drop them in the YouTube comments or you can hit me up on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. By the way, if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Irish ad-free plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to LockedOnIrish.supercast.com to join the club. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning reacting to everything new Notre Dame linebackers coach Brian Sean Marie has to say in his introductory press conference. Plus, we're going to break down the defensive mid-year enrollees and what they could mean for the Irish defense this season. I'll see you then.